This is Jeffrey Madoff, and welcome to our podcast called Anything and Everything with my partner, Dan Sullivan. It's interesting that, to me, when a major technology arrives, and you can go back through history, it rarely arrives as a neutral object. There's some kind of a story around it, and it's either, utopian or devastation. And when you look back, I think it's interesting because the human behavior around these things doesn't change. And the technologies, for the most part, end up being amplifications of something that already existed or combination of things that make it have a greater reach. I think AI has some unique characteristics, but not in the way it's being assessed and looked at as either utopian or devastation. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about both the promise of past technologies and what ended up being delivered, because it was never one thing or the other. Mm-hmm. And I thought back to one of the earliest advances was our ability to create and use fire. Mm-hmm. Which goes back the furthest of anything that man interacted with, because it was a control of energy, of mm-hmm. heat, of how food could be consumed. I mean, there was all kinds of things, with it. So, I often think of television as, it entered with two competing narratives. It would be the window on the world, broadening horizons, educating families, democratizing knowledge. It would be a vast wasteland. Mm-hmm. Turning attention into mush, flattening taste, and replacing things with passive consumption. And both are true. Mm-hmm. Both of those things happen. Oh, by the way, this is Anything and Everything. And we're just demonstrating that right now for you live. And I'm Jeff Madoff with my partner, Dan Sullivan. Mm-hmm. And I thought, in our world of anything and everything,
I was timing how long you would take before you realized that we were in the session. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you want to set up the action and then hit them with a title. I think we're living in a similar moment like we had with television with AI. And I'm wondering, first of all, do you agree or disagree with AI as being mostly greeted with one of two extremes?
Yeah. I think the polarization happened quite quickly after ChatGPT. I mean, first of all, AI has been around for several decades, but it wasn't in a consumer form. Mm-hmm. I mean, scientists, the military, they've been using AI for a couple of decades anyway. So it wasn't the capability as such that was the shocker. It was that it came in a readily available, very accessible consumer form. Because if you went back to October of 22, I don't remember anyone talking about AI. Mm-hmm. In December, everybody was talking about AI.
Yeah, I think that it was a faster raise in profile than anything we've seen before, because everything became about that.
Yeah, well, that's been true about every latest breakthrough. Mm-hmm. It happened, first of all, populations were bigger and communications were more advanced. Electrification happened faster than steam power, the awareness of steam power. But it was in a more consumer available form, electricity was, than steam power was. One of the really interesting, just to bring up as an example of a technology that changed things in a way that wasn't foreseen, was that they realized right off the bat in early 1800s that they were going to need steam engineers if they weren't available, steam engineers, people who knew how to work with the steam power and such that it was productive rather than destructive. And what they found out that boys' orphanages was an ideal place to get your future storm. And throughout England, all of a sudden, they started doing testing with boys who were orphans to see if they had the aptitude to become steam engineers. What are we going to do with our orphan boys? Well, they found one use for them. because boys had been used already in the military, especially in the Navy, but these were well-off children for the most part. What they call them, they called them squeakies.
Mm.
Their voices hadn't changed yet, so they were squeaky. And they were on board ship, and they were fairly expendable. It was always possible to get new boys on ship, and it's a dangerous place to work as a child. As an adult, it was dangerous to work, and they would lose them. But just to say that nobody has said when they created the technology, where are we going to get the future engineers? Because they didn't know that they were going to need future engineers when they created the technology.
Right.
So technology is not a thing unto itself. It has immediate economic, political, and cultural ramifications the moment you bring something new in. It advantages somebody and disadvantages someone else almost right off the bat, or is perceived to.
Well, you brought up something interesting, that AI has been around for a while and then just becoming more mass popularized in recent history. The same thing happened with, the computers. Computers were around for a few decades before the personal computer became something that I think was a huge change in how we interacted with the world. So I think there are those things that have, let's call them enterprise or professional application, and it may take some years before it becomes to the public.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now you don't need a movie theater necessarily to see a movie. You just watch it at home, stream to your house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all these things, there are the ones that have massive change. Well, all of these things change, let's call it host business that they're in, and change them, I think, pretty dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember, I know you didn't have the TV first in your home, but that you went to people's houses and you saw television. Do you remember how you felt when you first saw a TV picture?
Not exactly. I think I adapted to it fairly quickly. And I suspect that I was one of the advocates in the family who wanted TV, because I had friends who were well off, and we would go and after school, we would drop in, and there were afternoon programs that you could see. I certainly remember when Mickey Mouse Club came on, that was a big deal. That was around 55, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We had just moved from the farm to a small town. Wasn't a city, but it was 10,000 people. But I remember I had a friend, and they were prominent entrepreneurs. They were landscapers, and their specialty was the landscaping that went with the Ohio Turnpike.
You mean to enhance the look of the turnpike? Or?
Yeah. So everything got landscaped next to the turnpike. There weren't billboards, so they had lawns, especially where the interchanges were. You had the cloverleaf like that. Well, that was a vast area that was under grass, and they had one of the contracts for that, for a certain number of miles of the turnpike. So they were well off. So we would go over and watch television. You would have a full meal. You would have a Hostess Twinkie, you would have potato chips, and you would have a Pepsi.
Yeah, all the major food
Well, it was
groups.
balanced. It was balanced. Different textures. Yeah. It's so funny with Hostess Twinkies. So this was the 50s, and we were at Canyon Ranch 50 years later in the 2000s, and we had a meeting with a nutritionist. And I don't know how we got onto the topic, but he said, the neat thing about a Hostess Twinkie, he says, if you had saved one of the Hostess Twinkies when you were watching the Mickey Mouse Club, didn't eat it, kept it in its package, and you had it now, and you brought it in with you to this meeting, if you open it up, it would be just as fresh as it was in 1955.
Yeah, there's something about the ingredients in that. I'm sure that they would survive a nuclear attack.
Yeah. He said it would be like off the shelf. He said it wouldn't lose any taste. If you were satisfied back then, you would be satisfied today. Yeah. But, I'm kind of interested in new things. So, I don't have an inborn negativity. I don't see the dark side of new things. I'm at the point now where I've read enough history to know that when you introduce something new into society, it doesn't change one thing, it changes 100 things if it becomes popular. And a lot of the uses were unpredicted.
Well, right. In business, the television business, money was in selling televisions.
Magnavox.
Yeah.
That was our first television, was a Magnavox.
I don't remember what ours was, but I do remember when the television repair guy would come over, which I thought was, interesting with his toolkit. I remember getting close and looking down into the picture tube to see if I could see any more of the picture, which I couldn't. But, that an example of nobody really knew what the business model was.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they did is basically take the business model from print, magazines and newspapers, and realize that the real money was in selling their audience to advertisers, not in selling TVs.
Mm-hmm.
And you could, make money selling TVs because nobody had them, but it wasn't the growth business and gave advertising a reach it never had before.
Mm-hmm.
So there were major shifts in what the business of TV became from what they thought it was going to be initially, which is selling that appliance.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at AI, there's accelerated learning, pattern recognition, better pharmaceuticals and potential for medical diagnosis and so on, new creative tools and entrepreneurial lever that turns small teams into powerful examples of what that small team can do. And on the other side, there's the concerns about mass scale misinformation, job displacement and unemployment, surveillance, deepening inequality, and an erosion of trust because the notion of seeing is believing with deep fakes and everything else is no longer holds. So I think what makes AI distinctive is something you touched on, which is the scale and speed that it hit the general population, I think is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
And people that I know in private equity and so on, or who were trying to get businesses financed, I said, you had to stick .ai at the end of your business, and then you would get interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's that two-story pattern of something, the uplift story,
Mm-hmm.
more access, more efficiency, more creativity, more connection, and the decline story, distraction, manipulation, disliking, social decay, power concentrating in new hands, I think reveals a certain structural truth in these things. And I think it has more to do with human nature than the actual platform of AI.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's occurred to me, I think over probably the last decade, the extraordinary population growth on the planet,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was 1940, 4 years before I was born, the world population was 2.2 billion. And now it's somewhere, between 8.5 and 9. So that's a quadrupling of the world population in 80 years. And along with it was the structures that existed for a 2.2 billion world population were not up to dealing with 4 times the population. And there's never been a time in history when you had that sudden explosion of population. Everybody says, we're trying to keep up with technology. And I said, maybe you should look at it from the standpoint is that we're creating new technologies to keep up with the sheer complexity of human interactivity on the planet. That's happened because you have so many more humans. Each gets up every morning with a different idea in mind about what they're going to do for the rest of the day and who they're going to do it with and everything like that. And some of the predictions in the 50s, there was going to be massive starvation. Paul Ehrlich, he's famous for being wrong about everything. He's a professor from Stanford University. And I think he's made 50 predictions. None of them have happened. He was predicting global freezing in, 1950s and 1960s. But this sheer human complexity, and then all the empires have been falling apart since the First World War. these were sort of discrete units, and, the British Empire, the French had an empire, the Germans had an empire, the Russians had an empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they all fell apart within about a 50-year period, and you got all these little nation states, most of whom didn't like each other. So I think there was a human complexity that happened during our life. I mean, we'll never see that growth in population again that we saw just within our lifetime.
Yeah, well, I guess there is a reason that it's the only one that was described as a boom, which means explosive growth, than our generation, the baby boomers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that was considered big because it happened in the United States, and the United States was economically was the top dog. Pretty well, the U.S. was about half the world economy when the Second World War ended, because there had been so much destruction of a lot of the developed countries during the Second World War. The U.S., the mainland never was damaged at all by the war.
Well, I think that's why there were such shockwaves when 9/11 happened,
Mm-hmm.
and we were no longer impenetrable, and the oceans between us and the others wasn't enough to keep them away anymore because of advances in technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think it was interesting. I was talking to an Israeli friend around 9/11 after, when they were building the monument, there was all the conversations about the memorial, 9/11 memorial. And I met Michael Arad, who was the architect who won the competition and designed the 9/11 memorial. And he said, I want to be clear from the beginning that on one hand, we were dealing with a tremendous tragedy, number of people killed and so on. He said, but that also created a tremendous opportunity for builders.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were millions of square feet of office and residential space that had to be rebuilt. And he said, don't think for a minute that those people did not recognize the tremendous financial opportunity that was in front of them.
Yeah.
And my Israeli friend said, it's interesting because the United States has the luxury of building a huge monument and new buildings in memoriam of that attack. We're dealing with that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the distance doesn't discourage anymore.
Well, I think it does. There hasn't been one since 2001. It didn't start something where the U.S., I mean, generally speaking, the two oceans make a big difference.
Well, yes, they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do, but they're not insurmountable.
Yeah, this was an asymmetric strategy that worked once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. After that, everything clamped down on the transportation system, and, flight schools were instructed to kind of be more scrutinizing who your students are.
Yeah. Not to mention adding locks to the cockpit so that people couldn't enter it and so on.
Yeah.
But, I think that breakthroughs create capabilities.
They also create breakdowns.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. But they create capabilities faster than society can build the norms and the guardrails and the institutions to direct those capabilities responsibly. Mm-hmm. So these things happen and we don't quite know what to do to establish those guardrails because it's all moving so fast. It's all moving so quickly.
Well, speaking of, how have you adapted to AI personally?
Well, I'm going through a whole lot of different adaptation. And the way that I have adapted to it is that because a lot of my work required research in my production work and, also our book, but the book I did before that, which I didn't use AI for research then because in 2020 it wasn't around. 2019. So, I've used it as a research assistant. Mm-hmm. Where I know that I have to be careful and vet the information. Mm-hmm. You can't assume that anything I get is accurate until it's been verified. Mm-hmm. So, I'm using it in that way. I think about when I did, college term papers and stuff like that. God forbid you went to an actual library, to research something. Even the internet made it so much easier. Mm-hmm. to find things. And I think that, you know, one of the things that AI did that nothing else has done before, which I think makes it distinctive, is it's disrupting cognition, how we process information. And some of it, I think, is really insidious. I mean, now when you go to write an email, there's a suggested response to an email you get where you don't even have to think about it. You can just click on it if you want to be that banal.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, and you can summarize previous emails and conversations you've got and all these things, which the part that bothers me is it's really hard to opt out of those things. And it becomes very ever present, and no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, mine doesn't do that, so I never had the experience. I mean,
so don't you have, like, you have Gmail, right?
I have Gmail, but there's no suggestions on anything.
Maybe there's a way I can, because they're like kind of the default. I'd like to figure out, and I haven't tried yet, to figure out, you know, because I don't want to see.
Well, I adapted that. I was just going to treat emails like they were a letter.
Me too.
You'll notice I always start with your name and I sign off, you know, and everything else. You know, I learned how to write letters early in grade school, so I've just stuck with it. And people will compliment me. They say, you know, your emails are like getting a letter from someone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one thing I had to cut back is the size of the email that I was sending, because I'd send a whole page and I realized that people don't like whole page emails. So you put the larger thing that you want to communicate into a download. So if they want to read it, they can read the download. First of all, I don't get that many emails. I mean, I would say you would be in the top 5 people over the last 3 years that I've gotten emails from.
Do I win anything?
Just my continued presence. I respond.
You do. You do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the big thing is that I tend not to follow the crowd on anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what's becoming trendy or anything else, the opposite would be interesting to me.
Well, in your world, and when I'm talking about your world, not just strategic coach, but Joe's world with Genius Network, Joe Polish, and others, I don't know what the percentage of people is, but it's a lot because I get an awful lot of emails about people who are trying to sell you different ways to build your business by using AI and to be more productive by using AI and to be more successful by using AI and on and on and on. I think you have built a very effective moat around yourself so that you're not bothered with most of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of the entrepreneurial community, which you obviously are dealing with all the time, that's their pursuit.
Mm-hmm. Well, they think they're obligated. One of the things I've observed that when somebody gets the idea to contact you, does that entail any obligation to you to respond to them?
Interesting you say that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, for example, in the simplest form, this isn't technology. It's 7 o'clock at night and somebody knocks on the front door. Immediately, I know it's not for my benefit.
Uh-huh.
They're not doing it for any mutual thing. And Babs will sometimes, because it bothers her more than it bothers me. And, you know, we don't receive our packages if they're delivery. We have a driveway up, and all the delivery service knows that you have to go up the driveway and drop it at the kitchen door if you're going to do that. But I don't feel obligated to respond unless it's someone I know. And as part of what's going on in my life right now, that there's communication back and forth. But for example, even with my own company, with the team members that, you know, and when we're in the office, we have certain days when everybody's in the office, nobody would come and knock on my door or interrupt me. If we have cafes in both of our Chicago and Toronto offices, we have cafes. They're like 30 to 50 seat cafes because we're on 3 floors. And if you didn't have a cafe, people could go for half a year without seeing each other. And generally, everybody's in the cafe. If I'm at a table in the cafe and I'm working, nobody would interrupt me because we've set down some rules that you don't interrupt Dan when he's working, you
Hmm.
know. But the other thing is that if somebody wants my email number, I say, here's Becca Miller's email number. If you want to contact me, you can send an email. And Becca lives in that world. She loves that world, and she's very responsive. So the big thing is I was aware that all of a sudden there was this big thing. Everybody's connected to everybody at any time of the day. And I said, well, I don't want to live in that world. But the other thing is it doesn't cost me anything
Right.
that,
Other
that
than
I'm aware
time.
of, that I'm aware of.
Right. Other than time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel an obligation to answer, if it's a real query about the business opportunity or something, fine. But most of it is the equivalent of junk mail. It's just now email junk mail instead of hard copy junk mail. Trying to sell me something. And I never felt obligated to write back to anybody that sent me junk mail trying to sell me something. And, at the end of these, I'm saying, and if you don't wish to receive these, unsubscribing does nothing. You don't get unsubscribed. They just keep sending you the crap anyhow.
Mm.
And I think as part of I don't think it's bad manners not to respond. I didn't ask you for your query. I did follow up 4 times. That could be a message in itself if you thought about it. I'm not interested, so don't bother me. But I don't feel like I need to respond.
Mm-hmm.
It's why? Because you sent me something I have to respond. I didn't request it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's for your good, not mine. But I think that interconnectivity, that 24/7 connectivity invites those kinds of intrusions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and the technology companies encourage it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're going on the basis that everybody should be available all the time or something. And the other thing is that there's no such thing as privacy anyway. So don't worry about privacy. And I said, well, if you don't tell someone else, it's private.
Mm-hmm.
I have thoughts in my head that I haven't told anybody. So nobody knows about the thoughts in my head. I know that bothers Mark Zuckerberg, but it doesn't bother me. Yeah. I did a Perplexity. That's my AP. For those who don't know, I use Perplexity. I've never been on ChatGPT, so I don't really know how it works. I mean, I generally know how it works, but I'm not familiar with that particular form. And I did Perplexity, and they said, which technologies have had the greatest impact in the last 200 years? And by far, railroads was number one. Economic, political, social, cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed people's perception of time and distance in a very short period of time. And, I study these things. I'm always interested in the past. How did something similar to what's taking place now, how did it play out over several decades that you could see it? For example, the railroads never made money.
Never made money?
As an industry, they've never made money. It's what you could do with railroads that made all the money.
Right. Transport goods, service, and people.
Same thing with the airline industry. As an industry, has never made money, but lots of other money-making activities were possible because of the airlines. And I wouldn't be surprised if computers are the same thing. I would say as an entire industry, that means everybody involved in making computers, trying to come up with new computers, and that they still haven't made money, but they've enabled enormous money making in other industries. So the big thing, I think, with AI, it's not the AI companies that you should be looking at. It's what are people doing with AI where they are making money, and that means it's more productive, it's more creative, and it's more profitable. Those are the 3 indicators that you're moving ahead. And I would say my use of AI for writing has improved enormously in 22 months.
You mean the way you write or what?
The way I write, the speed with which I get things done, oh yeah, it's phenomenal. One of my quarterly books I laid out in 2 hours, start to finish. I laid out, usually it takes me 2 weeks.
Mm. Yeah. And are you happy with the quality that you're getting? Or have you trained it in your voice and done enough stuff that you like
Yeah.
what's coming back?
Yeah, there's about 50 prompts built up that customs that, and, I have some rules. I only do one thing and then it does something and then I do something. And every time I do something, I'm expanding context or I'm introducing new content. But it's very useful for certain things. And I've just done one thing. I haven't tried any other AI programs or applications. I'm strictly interested in what does it do to writing.
Hmm. Yeah, well, you can become a house painter or you can become a fine artist.
Mhm.
It depends on the brush and the material and your ideas and execution and so on. And so it's a tool that you're using in a particular way.
Mhm.
But I think what's interesting about AI is it's affecting how people design, code, write, coordinate, how you plug it into the workflow to make that workflow more efficient. Some of the ideas we'll be exploring in our book that you've written about is the idea of AI is the backstage
Mhm.
of the casting, not hiring of
Yeah.
any business. It should be the backstage. It's not the front stage.
Mhm.
It should, in the ideal world, free up the front stage
Mhm.
for those creative pursuits that make it faster, more creative, and more possible.
Yeah, I think I've told you in some of our podcasts that the clients, especially the ones I don't coach, they'll ask me when they're doing their workshop, but the mealtime, I make myself available for level 1, level 2 clients. I'm the level 3 coach, but level 1, 2, they'll come and they'll have lunch with me. And the last 3 lunches I had over the last 3 weeks, the entire conversation for the entire lunch hour was on AI.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
No, they're just asking about AI. They're talking about AI, they're using AI, they're wondering, what's it do to creating teamwork in the future. There's a lot of questions, and they're hearing things. This woman asked me the question. She says, "Well, how do you think about AI?" And I said, "Front stage, backstage."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "If AI is going to have a place in my company, it's going to be backstage. It's not going to be front stage.
Right.
Front stage is for humans. Backstage is for technology." And she said, "Wow, that simplifies things." So then I gave her several examples of good example of that and bad example of that, just from my own experience, where somebody had let technology interfere with the hospitality that should be provided by humans with a QR code. And I said, well, I don't feel well taken care of with a QR code. I like menus when I go into a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
But I have noticed about 3 or 4 restaurants that were experimenting with QR codes have gone back to paper or laminated or whatever they're using, but it's actually something you can hold in your hands and read and, ask questions about. And so I think that when a new technology comes along, they say we can apply this everywhere, but there's pushback where certain places, like when Google brought out their glasses, what was that, 15 years ago? They brought out the glasses. Immediately, they were banned in every bar and restaurant in San Francisco, which is near the center of the technological revolution, because you could take pictures with your glasses. And they said, no, no, there's no picture taking going on in this realm. So my sense is that I believe in Newton's third law: for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And there are some things where we just said, nope, nope, you can't. I go to Canyon Ranch, you can't have a phone except in your room.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be in the restaurant with a phone. You can't be in doing any of the activities with a phone. You have to leave your phone in your room. Well, that's a rule. And people say, well, I'm not coming back here again. I said, well, that's a choice you can make. But I think people are just establishing rules on where technology is allowed and where it won't be allowed.
I mean, I think that's true. I think it's also the QR code in the restaurant. I did very informal research where I came across the QR codes. Some very nice, expensive restaurants. And when they gave me the QR code, I said, I know I'm maybe older than your average customer, but do people actually like having to get their phone out and look at a menu on their phone. And he said they hate it.
Yeah.
And I said, why are you doing it? He said, we have to, but I think we're going to go off it because you are far from unique. So many people complain about this, and I don't blame them. And to me, as a business person, it's also, that does nothing to enhance the hospitality aspect. In fact, it distances me from it. I've got to bring the tool to decode your menu, and a menu is also a marketing tool. There's an aesthetic to it, a presentation. It's the storybook of the restaurant, but also it's trial and error. It may seem like a good idea, but it's not because people don't like it.
Yeah.
And, and I'm sure at Canyon Ranch with the phones, part of their thing is you come here to get away from all that. So we don't want people walking down the hallways with their phones, talking loud into their phones and all that. If you're in your room and the door's shut, fine. Otherwise, this is not just for you. This is the community we're setting up while you're here. So, it's amazing what people consider. They don't want their rudeness interrupted.
Yeah. I think these things sort themselves out over time.
Eventually, I think so.
Yeah. And we're still in the early days of AI. We're just a little bit beyond 3 years since it started. So one of the reasons I focus on entrepreneurs is because entrepreneurs, based on their success, can design all sorts of environments which most people can't.
In larger businesses, you mean?
Oh, no, it's just a function of how much money you make, because you can buy privacy, you can buy time, you can buy service, you can buy all sorts of things. My attitude is people don't like things, then change them,
Yeah, that's a complicated proposition because change doesn't come easily or quickly.
No, I'm saying entrepreneurs with money can change a lot of things really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on the nature of the investment, the size of the investment, and what their stake is in it. I think that's true. I think that the most important operating principle, and we go into this in our book, and this is true, this I think is the fundamental thing with AI, is human in the loop. You have to have people that are forming that bridge to the front stage where things are fact-checked before they're put out there or somehow vetted. And this isn't just for veracity. This is also to the Four Seasons, not their slogan, but, what you had talked about many times, which, I really like is, systematize.
The predictable.
Yes. But you need the human in the loop to be checking things because it's like having an assistant. If you don't check their output, when you just put it out there. And the thing about AI is it can sound authoritative, but you can't assume that it's correct.
Well, I think fast things are magical things. Things that happen real fast have a magic to them, but they can be magically wrong.
Right. Well, that's right.
Yeah. And that's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying that. Movies are magic because, in the old days, anyway, they were individual frames that were just presented to you, in a very, very fast sequence, and it looked like they were moving,
Right.
Yeah, so there's a magic to speed, but if the magic is meaningless, then after a while, things that can happen real fast, it's like 1 hour delivery, when Prime came in, it would be same day delivery, or if it was local, it could be 3 hour delivery. And what they find is not everybody needs it in 3 hours.
Right. Right.
They don't need it 3 hours. Like if I got it in a couple of days, that would be okay.
Well, I was talking to someone, sort of a variation on that point I had the most amazing experience. I walked into this place, saw something I liked, tried it on, paid for it, and left with it immediately.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And it was without a delivery person.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And thank goodness, at least as of yet, Amazon doesn't have drones flying around New York City. But that drone delivery was part of their 3 hour delivery.
Yeah, and they're finding enormous, not in my backyard. It's not
Yeah,
going
I'm
to
sure. I'm sure.
No, I mean, it'll never happen in Toronto. It'll never happen.
Yeah, I don't think that any of the major markets it's going to happen when there's enough people out there with baseball bats or their hunting rifles shooting drones down.
But yeah, there's also the aspect of crime. The criminals can follow where the drones are going.
Right.
You know, if it's dropped, you can send someone up and pick up the package. That's the drones can't take it inside your house. They'll put it on a front porch or something. But, you know, the fact is that the people who create technology, they're doubling down on what their technology can do. And they're trying to, most of them haven't paid for themselves. All the research and the development went in. They haven't paid for themselves. So they're a little bit desperate to get a payback for the original investment. And so they create a story that morally you're required to agree with their schedule on how fast the technology could go. And I said, no, I have no moral obligation to your risk whatsoever.
Now, how do you mean that?
Well, some of the big AI companies, the amount of money it's required to get their product out isn't being paid back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and, you know, the stock market is downgrading them. This is not a happy, easy time for the big technology firms that see AI as the way of the future.
Yeah, well, I've been reading some things lately.
Morgan Stanley said that there's panic in the investment world and the AI world where people thought this was going to happen way, way faster than it's actually happened.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody is making money at it. You might have made money if you invested and got in and got out, or in long-term investment or whatever. I don't know. But I think that there are the human qualities that can't be overlooked. And one of those main qualities is trust. Can you trust the outcome of the efforts?
Yeah.
And I don't think people are going to have a loyalty to AI, but they will have a loyalty to a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are certain things, again, it's how you use the tool that's going to make the biggest difference. And I think trust is really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the trust that Uber lost because of its CEO lasted for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think that AI there are certain things it's not good at because the only way they can increase trust is through consistency. But trust between humans and trust between a human and a machine are two very different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, for example, I get Investors Business Daily on weekends, and they're strictly an investment newspaper. That's all they talk about. And they were saying that, and this was a conversation that we had yesterday, but Tesla was down 15% over the last year. Their sales were down 15%.
I'm sorry, which sales?
Their sales, Tesla's,
right, yes.
like the EV sales were down 15%. And if you measured it before the end of September, they were up. The last 3 months, they just dropped enormously because the subsidies and mandates weren't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everything got cut off on September 30th. So everybody who was going to buy bought during August and September, and it looked like sales were going way up, but they stopped and fell off a cliff. And they said that it has to be, he has to get his money now. He has to go into robots and self-driving cars, you know. And they were saying it's a big gamble on their part because it's now that the EV market is now probably going into the future is a niche market. Will they disappear? No, they won't disappear, but they're a niche market. And one of the reasons they haven't gotten the prices down, and the other thing is the charging stations haven't gone in. There's no money in charging stations, so it has to be a government effort to do it.
True.
And then you got to make them good for any car if they're going to be used.
Right, right.
Gas stations are good for any car.
Right, right.
Yeah, but the charging stations have been made for particular cars. You know, it takes 3 minutes to fill your car with gas, you know, and everybody knows that. So my sense is that there are people who are big risk takers. You know, I mean, their basic operation in life is to be involved in a big risk.
Right.
And sometimes the risks pay off and sometimes the risks don't pay off, but nobody else is obligated to support someone else's risk.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't fulfill a need or desire that you have.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Earlier, we were talking about, I was mentioning the replies that are built into Gmail.
Hmm.
And I think that on one hand, you can summarize things faster. You can automate responses. You can standardize a lot of things and make it, all of that quick. The downside is all the bot walls that exist that block real help and degrade the customer experience. I mean, have you ever experienced calling customer service and all the different prompts that you have to go through to get anybody? And try getting an actual person from the airlines if there's a question on your schedule. I think there's a lot of these things that are turning more and more people off. Now, I can't back that up with data, but I can say that I've read an awful lot about how frustrated people are with those things. And, getting actual customer service and somebody who you can understand. I'm curious to see, in the big wave technology shifts that we are seeing that are happening with the unique proposition of AI, which is the building up of cognitive responses to mimic human beings. That's basically what it is. I think that law firms going over cases, finding patterns, all these kinds of things, it can be a very, very powerful tool. What I wonder is, and there's so many conflicting thoughts going on in my head, but I think that things have to be easy to use, but then you can't be lazy about using them in the sense that you can be passing on things that don't reinforce your brand, that confuse your customers or alienate your customers. And alienating them is the same thing as never having any human contact with them. I mean, the whole thing that we're about in our book, Casting Not Hiring, is front stage, backstage, and the human support that is necessary to be in front of other humans, no matter what business you're in.
Yeah.
And the agnostic nature of what we're doing is that model has worked for thousands of years.
Well, the other thing is that you have enough examples, and you gave a lot of them in part one of the book, is that anytime someone differentiates themselves with live person-to-person theater, it works. Why
do you think it works?
We like people. People like people. People like stories. People like humor. They like unpredictability in human conversation. They like the unpredictability in stories. And I think there's just part of our entire nervous system is that at the very fundamental thing that we figure out really fast, this is a good situation or this is a bad situation. And I think, that's just, I like this, I don't like it. We walked out of a play, we were in London and we walked out at the interval and we were seated so that two of us were in one row and two of us were sitting in front. And I stood up and I said, what would feel good right now is a good half-hour walk. I would just like to get out and walk. And everybody looked at me and they said, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And I said, yes, I think I'm thinking what you're thinking and everything else. And we all four of us said, let's get out of here. This is terrible. But what were we picking up on? And part of it is that all of us have a pretty solid background in going to really interesting plays. And somewhere in our brain, there's about 5 checks of whether this is a good play and this is not a good play. But I don't know if anybody else was leaving, but we were leaving and we just walked out. And one of our friends said, I've been in that situation 20 times in my life where I didn't walk out of the play or performance or game or whatever it was. He said, but I didn't do it. And I always felt very badly about myself the next day. And I said, well, that's a very useful criteria. You just project 24 hours into the future and say, do I feel good about myself for not making a decision to leave as a result of that? But that's sort of a human thing. I don't think AI could make a determination of whether to stay or to walk out of the play.
Yeah, well, I think, what would that look like if AI walked out of the play? But I think that, what you're talking about is the nuancing of a decision. And can you get that kind of nuance around a decision?
Yeah.
And again, I think that if you're the type of person who wants to offload everything into something else, you're putting an awful lot of unfounded trust into the ability of something that you don't yet know can deliver. And I think that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The other night, we were watching this comedian, Nate Bargatze. I don't know if you know who he is. He's very funny, great delivery. And he's been around for a while. I just learned about him maybe 2.5 years ago. He's been, he had his first Netflix special in 2019. He's now playing almost like stadiums. And I thought, well, this is interesting. There's probably 8,000 people. And it's just one guy walking around, telling clever, funny stories, speaking into a microphone. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting because this could have taken place 50 years ago, 80 years ago.
2,000 years ago.
Yeah. And I thought this is really fascinating because this guy he's gotten very popular and people connect to his humanity. And when you see him, he's very funny and he's a master at some of these stories that then have a very funny twist or a repetition that repeats throughout the evening of his comedy or whatever. And then I think the same thing when I see a singer perform and there are people that spend lots and lots of money to see that performance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are lots of people who will pay to watch somebody play video games, which I have no comprehension of why anybody would be willing to pay to watch somebody else play a video game.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're seeing a sport that...
Well, it's not your thing.
It's not.
No.
It's not. But it's extremely popular.
Oh, yeah. Well, gaming is now the number one sport in the world. It's in the billions. People who watch this. Well, first of all, it's competition.
Right.
It's happening in the moment. And competition is very interesting. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, and the people that go know who the competitors are and who they're rooting for.
Yeah.
I understand that. I just find it...
Well, it's not your thing.
No.
Yeah. Me either.
Well...
We really went everything this time. Sometimes we emphasize anything, but I think we went everything right now.
Yeah, I think that we did. Thanks for joining us today on our show, Anything and Everything. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. For more about me and my work, visit acreativecareer.com and madoffproductions.com. To learn more about Dan and Strategic Coach, visit strategiccoach.com.